This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
Okay, so I do have a piece of true crime news that we can talk about. We had talked about this, and I never know if these episodes are airing in the right order, but I think this one will definitely. People can play catch up if not, because we talked about this kind of weird thing happening down with Judge Earl Glanville. He was covering Young Thug's trial down in Atlanta, and the Superior Court Judge, Rachel Krause, in like middle of July, she threw him off the case. So this was the guy, if you remember, he had demanded that the defense attorney tell him how he had gotten information that there had been a meeting between a witness, the prosecutor, and the judge ex parte. And the defense attorney basically said, I can't tell you at all, which ultimately what you and I sort of decided was it was probably that the defendant had told the defense attorney and therefore it was protected by privilege. He couldn't acknowledge it at all. But Judge Krause ended up hearing a recusal motion, and it had gone before Glanville originally, and Judge Glanville said that he didn't think he needed to be removed. But ultimately, when Attorney Steele, do you remember this whole thing? He was held in contempt.
I was going to say, the attorney was held in contempt. So, yes, that creates a conflict of interest.
Yeah, and he was going to get like a long sentence where he was going to be serving weekends and all this other crazy stuff.
It was like the next 10 weekends in jail. It was crazy. So did that get straightened out?
Well, Judge Glanville he had refused to recuse himself from this crazy trial that has been going on for months and months and months. There's I think 29 defendants, and it started in May of 2022 as far as the arrest, but it's basically still going on in Atlanta now in summer 2024. But Judge Glanville got removed from his portion of the trial.
And so this isn't like an all-day, everyday trial, right?
No, they're having parts. So in this instance, because there's so many people to get together, they bring all the remaining co-defendants, and I think Young Thug was the one that we were talking about, who was Steele's client. They bring them in, and they have parts of the trial as they can get the witnesses together, and then basically it takes time because you're then dealing with judges, and there have been multiple motions. At one point, Brian Steele, the attorney held in contempt, he tried to motion for Rachel Krause to recuse herself from deciding whether or not Judge Glanville should stay on the Young Slime Life case. This is the rapper Jeffrey Williams and his people that have been accused of being part of this RICO action down there. I just thought it was an interesting piece of news. You don't see a lot of judges removed like that.
Well, I'm not following this trial. I know we talked about the ex parte meeting that essentially the judge really got on to the attorney about. He refused to say who it was for whatever reason, whether it was attorney-client privilege, whether the judge should absolutely know who was there, whatever the reasoning. I do think I think that once a judge has held an attorney on a case in contempt for a controversial reason, because to me it was highly controversial to have an extrajudiciary meeting, an ex parte meeting. The attorney called him out on it, and then he holds him in contempt. That's a weird situation anyway, but it absolutely rises to the level for the judge to
recuse
to
themselves.
recuse themselves. And I always find it interesting. So, except for a frivolous attempt, right? And what I mean by that is like there's really no basis in fact. It's just a Hail Mary. I don't like the judge. I want him off my case. If you're sitting as a judge and you face a situation, especially one like I just explained, where you held one of the attorneys in contempt for something you did wrong, essentially, why wouldn't you recuse yourself? Right?
Yeah.
I feel like that would be like the judicial efficient thing to do would be say, you know what, you're absolutely right. I am going to recuse myself because this has raised a conflict. I'm of the firm belief that anytime you're not welcome in a situation, you're being asked to remove yourself from a situation, again, when it's not frivolous, right? As a judge, if you've done something, right? If the request is frivolous, if it's merited. Anytime it's merited, I feel like that would be the time to show your integrity and to take yourself off the case.
Yeah, I mean, I see recusals like pretty regularly. That's not so. A motion to recuse basically says you want the judge to step down. That's not super unusual for it to be granted or denied, and like for the reasoning to be laid out. What's unusual is for them to go to the step of having another judge hear a motion because they don't feel like they're getting the appropriate response. I've seen situations where judges leave a case and then a special judge is appointed or another judge comes in. Or I used to see more frequently where like a senior judge in that district would take over. But this case was a little unusual in them having like these sort of infighting going on between.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and they had 18 jurors in this case. They've lost a couple of alternates, but they had 18 jurors
that can just randomly show up whenever they have.
No, yeah, that I don't know what they're doing there. I'm trying to read about it. But.
I feel like I don't know anything about this trial except the one situation with the attorney, and it sounds like there's quite a bit running amok here.
There is. It looks like they've even lost it. The trial has gone on so long that at some point, one of the jurors just moved away.
To get out of being on the trial?
I don't think that's the case. I think their lease had run out and they moved, and where they moved, they no longer live in that county.
I can't imagine. So the only reason you would have these like multiple defendants and like all this stuff occurring is in the interest of judicial efficiency. The fact that the trial has gone on for however long, 2 years or whatever, I feel like that's a moot point at this point in time.
I've seen, and I'm not knocking the state as a whole, but I've seen multiple cases in Georgia where they just make a disaster out of something that shouldn't have been a disaster. And I get turned around trying to follow those cases. Every once in a while, we'll have one on where we talk about a Georgia case or whatever. But like usually those cases, I've heard so many different pretrial things. By the time it gets to trial, I'm confused. And you and I sit down. We tried to record a couple of them over the years. Most of them we got to go, and bail midway through trying to record it because it's such a disaster, or we have a controversial one or the other has a controversial opinion. But it's weird because Georgia is the one place where if you and I get to talking about a case down there, we will end up in an argument. And I found that.
Well, I can't recall any cases specifically out of Georgia, but I just know the circumstances, not knowing anything about the trial, that have just kind of been laid out. They're weird. That's a weird situation.
Well, that's where Justin Ross Harris was. And that's where the Ahmaud Arbery case was.
Oh, so, yeah. We've got several episodes that have never aired.
They will never air because we weren't able to complete our analysis.
Maybe one day in the bloopers reel.
Yeah, maybe. I have been watching something where there was a trial. There is no longer a trial. And I brought it up for us to talk about today because we're kind of in our summertime mode, and we're working on a much bigger case. But I did want to sit down and like talk to you about this because we just aired, like, I think the way this will go down is Unsolved Mysteries will air, and then there's an episode in there where we talk about a couple of different sort of news things, kind of like we're doing here. But I watched something that I had never seen before, and I wanted to talk about it. It takes some background, but I thought this is the ideal time to do it because it's not really multiple episodes, but it is something that was so shocking and newsworthy to me that I actually got on the phone with TMZ about it. And that's unheard of. I think that's happened once before, a very long time ago, maybe 6 years ago, 4 years ago. I had something to talk to him about. But for the most part, I never do that because they're tabloid-esque. But this was a case they were covering, and I was pretty positive the way this had gone down, they had missed a piece of what was happening and needed to play catch up because they didn't seem to have anybody in the courtroom. And it turned out they did have somebody watching it, but I don't think that person understood what they were witnessing.
I think that was a theme here.
Yeah.
In fact, I was the one who said, hey, you need to look at this because I realized what was happening, and it took a little bit for me to catch up because I wasn't following it. I don't typically follow live trials until like halfway through, and you're like, hey, you need to watch this. And then I have to catch up, and then I have to watch the rest of it. So this was just by happenstance.
Yeah. And so if people don't know what we're about to talk about, I'm going to give you like the super quick nutshell, and then we're going to talk about this interesting part. And I will say this from like a disclaimer perspective. I regularly work in the movie industry, and usually in pretty small roles, but I have been on sets most of my adult life. And this is about an incident that takes place on a movie set. In fact, it takes place October 21st, 2021, in a place called Bonanza City, New Mexico. While filming at the location that had been secured by production at the Bonanza Creek Ranch, a cinematographer named Helena Hutchins was fatally shot, and a director named Joel Souza was injured during a scene in which actor Alec Baldwin was holding a gun. This is on the set of the movie or the film Rust. And while the actor was holding this gun for close-up shots, a live round was discharged from a prop revolver gun that he was using. The incident is investigated by the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office, and then that falls under the 1st Judicial District in New Mexico, so the district attorney's office gets involved. It's also investigated by the OSHA Bureau of New Mexico and the New Mexico Occupational Health and Safety Bureau, and the FBI gets involved at one point. Now, in multiple media releases and affidavits and legal documents, the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office, they acknowledged that Alec Baldwin, who's the actor in the scene holding this gun that contained a live round, and the first assistant director, who's a guy named David Halls, they've acknowledged that the two of them had no idea that the gun that Alec Baldwin was holding was loaded. Definitely didn't know that it was loaded with a live round. Now, there have been a couple of like different things that have happened with this case. January 31st, 2023, so a couple months later, the Santa Fe district attorney at the time, they decide they're going to move forward with charges in this case. Now, they charge the armorer, who I'm going to use that term loosely, the representative of the armorer. She has that title for this production, Hannah Gutierrez Reed. She gets charged with a single count of involuntary manslaughter in the death of Helena Hutchins. They also decide to charge Alec Baldwin. Now, how they're charging him depends on like which story you believe. He is a producer on the production, so some responsibilities would fall to him. the overall safety, security, all the deadlines, and the financial welfare of the production would fall to the producers.
Right, but they sorted that in pretrial.
Right. David Halls, the first assistant director, he agrees that he's going to come in and plead guilty to a charge of the negligent use of a deadly weapon. And this happens right as these charges are coming down. Now, February 23rd, Alec Baldwin comes in. This is all in 2023. He pleads not guilty. It was reported that prosecutors had indicated that there were charges against him, that the charges against him were being dropped. Hannah Gutierrez Reed, she ends up also getting charged with tampering with evidence. So fast forward a year later, March 6, 2024, Hannah Gutierrez Reed gets found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. She is remanded into police custody, and on April 15th, she is sentenced to spend 18 months in prison. While her trial has gone on and finished up in April, during the events of the pretrial, Alec Baldwin is again indicted on charges of involuntary manslaughter. He pleads not guilty. His trial begins July 9th of 2024, which sort of brings us to now and to today. The trial opens up, and it looks like it's going to be like a totally boring defense attorney versus prosecutor trial. And I'm going to pause there for a second, and I'm going to talk a little bit about like some of the ins and outs that have gone down here. The whole thing here is this is a tiny movie. And when I say tiny, the movie is basically going to be completely put together for between $5 and $6 million. Joel Souza is the writer-director who came up with the story with Alec Baldwin. It is a Western film. So the guns, the props, the locations are period locations. This movie was going to shoot for 21 days. It was basically going to start in this place that's like south of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it was going to wrap up in 3 weeks. Hannah Gutierrez Reed, she is a stepdaughter of a longtime industry professional named Fel Reed. Fel Reed is sort of an expert in weapons that aren't real. He is literally an armorer. So her responsibility on set was going to be to oversee all the weapons that would be coming in and going from the set on specified days. And so the production had made her the, quote, properties key, meaning she was the person who answered to the head of properties or the props department. Now, she was designated to work as an armorer through October the 17th. This incident took place on October the 21st. So on the day of the incident, on paper, she had no more responsibilities. She was only there to work as a props assistant, meaning things that you see in the scenes on the walls that move or that actors may be carrying. Rust was the second movie that Hannah had worked on serving as their sort of lead armorer, which is a part-time job on movie sets because you don't have guns on set every day. She had been complained about on the previous film, which was this movie called The Old Way, and it starred Nicolas Cage. There was an incident in which she pulled the trigger on a weapon without the appropriate warnings or safety protocols, and this caused Nicolas Cage to walk off set. David Halls, he was working as an assistant director on Rust. In the aftermath of all of this, it comes out that like he had been on multiple shows and movie sets where complaints had been made about him ignoring safety protocols. Most of them were related to what would I call fire marshal incidents. That's when doors are blocked, or when a hydrant can't be reached, or a fire lane is blocked with somebody's car. He had been fired from working on a movie in 2019 called Freedom's Path, which was a Civil War drama, historical drama. He was fired after a firearm discharged unexpectedly and wounded a crew member. He was blamed for that. Other crew members had made pretty valid complaints about David Halls. And this happens a lot on movie sets where complaints are filed. They're generally not about things that are quite as serious as firearms discharging or the death of a cinematographer. But when this happens, depending on what level movie you're on, different agencies and different unions come in to investigate what's happening here. That's sort of catching us up on how all of this came to be and who the players are. We know that David Halls, he took a sentence that was basically the lowest thing that he could possibly take in terms of, I think it was a misdemeanor, negligent use of a deadly weapon. He got 6 months unsupervised probation. He got a $500 fine, and he had to do 24 hours of community service. When Hannah Gutierrez Reed goes through her process, she waived her rights to preliminary hearings to determine whether or not criminal charges could stand, which I feel like this was a mistake, but it looks like in this jurisdiction, it's pretty commonplace that they do this. So her trial got scheduled and goes through the process, but this back and forth had really occurred with Alec Baldwin, and it takes place the whole time that this is going on in 2023. By August 21st of 2023, a New Mexico judge had already scheduled that Hannah was going to go to trial, and that trial was going to last February 21st through March the 6th of 2024. October 2023, this is 6 months after the felony charges were first dropped against Alec Baldwin. Prosecutors set it all up and said that they were going to ask the grand jury whether he should again be criminally charged in the death of Helena Hutchins. January 19th, 2024, which is a year to the day that the involuntary manslaughter charges were first announced, he gets indicted again, and he is basically recharged with involuntary manslaughter. He pleads not guilty. He gets conditions of release. He's not allowed to own a firearm, consume any alcohol, leave the country, or come into contact with anyone who is a witness in the case. And a judge in February of 2024 sets his trial to run July 9th through July 19th. March 6th comes along. The jury only took about 2 hours to find Hannah Gutierrez Reed guilty on the charge of involuntary manslaughter. They acquit her of tampering with evidence. Almost immediately after the verdict was read, they put her in custody. They put her in jail. They held her in custody until her sentencing hearing. March 29th, her lawyers file a motion for a new trial. It's denied by the judge, and she's sentenced in April. Now, May 24th, a judge there in Santa Fe named Mary Marlowe Sommer, she denies a motion that's filed by Alec Baldwin's defense team to dismiss the charges and to boot the trial off the schedule. And when she denies this motion, that clears the way for the trial to move forward. On the first day of trial, July 9th, 2024, they select 12 jurors and 4 alternative jurors. On July 10th, they have their opening statements. The prosecution basically said that the gun which was assigned to Baldwin when the shooting took place had been found to be in perfect working order and a perfectly fine firearm, and that it was on Baldwin as an actor and producer to do a gun safety check because he knew that Hannah Gutierrez Reed was inexperienced, and they said that he pulled the trigger in reckless disregard for Ms. Hutchins' safety. So those are the main issues here. Did he pull the trigger, or did it discharge by accident, and is he responsible for that?
Right. And so we're talking about a situation where a movie set is happening, right? So these people are all going to work that day, right? and they end up in criminal court over it, and someone dies, right?
Correct.
And so it is already on this sort of verge of the bizarro, right?
Yes.
Because I do think that with Hannah Gutierrez Reed, I feel like she seems pretty young, and maybe you said she's inexperienced, and I don't feel like there was any sort of intent behind her actions. It was just reckless, right?
Yeah, this is not a big studio production. And I'll just say that, like, one of the things that happens on these smaller movies under $10 million is people get jobs because they were standing there.
Right. And so, like, yeah, you be the armorer, right?
Right. Like, you're Thel Reed's kid. You can be an armorer. So then after that, like, people think that you're an armorer and you
Right.
get the next job on the next movie. But a lot of times people have no idea what they're doing on movie sets.
Right. And getting your foot in the door, like, sometimes that's the way it happens. And that's kind of how I saw this. And, I can definitely see where having, whatever reason she got the job, it's, tragic, but it's also kind of, there is no way for a live round to end up in a gun used as a prop in a movie without just a really big duh moment happening, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make any sense, and it to me it said a lot that we're talking about Alec Baldwin is the actor handling the gun versus Hannah Gutierrez Reed, who is this inexperienced armor on set who ultimately hands the gun over to the safety person who calls it a cold gun and hands it to the actor, right? So
Yeah.
you've got an experienced actor who's used to working with experienced people, right?
Yes.
Who are not going to hand him a cold gun that is not cold, right?
Right.
And so there's this big disconnect, right? And I think that that's kind of where it starts to fall apart. I mean, Hannah Gutierrez Reed would go back in time in an instant and make sure that, the guns were empty, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like, if they had any inkling this could happen, like, on this set at this time, they would have fixed it. Everybody involved would have fixed it.
Absolutely, because they, like I said, they all went to work that day to shoot a movie. And, there's a lot that goes into the movies we end up seeing at the end of the day that isn't glamorous and it isn't fun and it's hard work for people, right?
Yeah. And this is a really good example if you want to, like, go down a rabbit hole in terms of, like, seeing different sides of, like, this is a large independent film. I'm not going to, like, call it a small movie. It is small financially, but it's a big, like, there's a lot of players involved. In fact, it spawned so many civil lawsuits. So starting in November of 2021, the gaffers are electric workers on the set moving cables and plugs and lights, whose name is Serge Svetnoy. He files a lawsuit against the production for negligence. And then by the next day, Mamie Mitchell, who is the script supervisor, she calls for a lawsuit saying she couldn't do her job. And she wants to point out to everybody that the script did not call for a firearm to ever be discharged on the screen. By January of 2022, Hannah Gutierrez Reed had filed a lawsuit against the armorer Seth Kinney, who runs PDQ and Prop, for bringing these live rounds on set. And this is related to the box of ammunition that the round would have come from. It allegedly arrived the day of the shooting. By January 23rd, you've got Alec Baldwin in court basically asking California judges to dismiss the lawsuit with Mamie Mitchell, and then that case gets paused. They outright reject the request to dismiss some of the other suits. But you have all of these different lawsuits happening. So it develops tons of paperwork that you can go and read where people are giving their sides of things. There are medics filing lawsuits. You've got the family of Helena Hudson's filing lawsuits, and they're naming like all these different people that we haven't heard about before. I saw that the prop master gets named in there. They settle parts of these lawsuits, but ultimately what they're really waiting for is this last court action where Alec Baldwin will go on trial, and it should put things to bed. So they've seated the jurors. They've had their opening arguments. They go through a day of witnesses. Did you watch some of this, the trial itself? It's kind of boring.
It was very boring.
Well, they get all the way through the day on July the 11th. And at the end of the day, a motion gets filed in sort of in between the time court adjourns before we come back the next morning. Alec Baldwin's lawyers, they file a motion to dismiss the case because they say that they have discovered that the prosecution has hid some evidence about the source of the bullets that are loaded into the gun. So
boy, did it get unboring really fast.
Yeah, like the motion does no justice to the insanity. But they basically say that a witness has walked into a local sheriff's office, the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office, and they have handed bullets over related to the Rust case, and that these bullets were filed under a different new case number by a crime scene technician, and that the defense were not informed that they were in the possession of the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office. So the judge looks at this and she says, we got to have a hearing on this. She sends the jurors out and says, we're going to hear this motion to dismiss because this is serious. And what unfolds is absolute batshit insanity. First up, they bring a corporal in who is listed as the lead agent on this case. For those of you who don't know what a corporal is, it is very, very low rank on the totem pole. And I pulled up in the course of this trial, I was curious about her and how this had gone down. She gets on the stand and becomes the lead agent here because she's called about this and does nothing. I looked up the chain of command at the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office. There are at least 36 people in this office above her in rank, and none of them seemed anywhere close to taking any responsibility for these bullets that had come in.
Doesn't it tell you something about
Yes.
the case overall when you put it that way? This is a situation where it's a crime that occurred on the outskirts of acting.
Right.
Right? Okay, so you've got somebody surprising that is the lead on the case. But like you said, there's like 36 people that outrank her. And that should tell you and I'm not trying to demean the death that occurred. It occurred. But
nor are we disparaging the corporal herself.
No, not at all. It's just, and I feel like the actions and outcomes speak for themselves here, as far as what we're saying with regard to this case wasn't of a lot of important. I don't know how to say it. It didn't take like priority.
No, this case was so far down the totem pole that like the sheriff's office it is not delivering on what the prosecutor is saying in terms of the seriousness of all of this. In fact, I was shocked at this. If you don't watch true crime trials, but you want to see something insane, watch the Alec Baldwin trial, wherever you want to pull it up. Court TV has a YouTube channel. Law and Crime has a YouTube channel. They cover things kind of gavel to gavel. Go on there and watch the July 9th, July 10th, July 11th trial that leads up to the July 12th motion hearing that we're about to tell you more about. It is the best thing that you could watch in the shortest amount of time if you just want to know what should never happen in criminal trials ever. They put this corporal on. Her story doesn't really hold water for the judge, and she doesn't understand what the corporal is trying to say because the corporal has been thrown under the bus by the prosecutor. And the sheriff didn't understand the magnitude of the defense's motion. So they bring this lieutenant in who looks like he's, I don't know, maybe 13, 14. He's a baby-faced lieutenant. He is in the chain of command, but he's also a witness. And they have a lapel camera on this lieutenant that they give you on this July 12th hearing day. And this lapel camera shows these bullets coming into the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office, and a crime scene evidence tech comes and receives these bullets into evidence. And they call several people and try and figure out what to do with these bullets. And this very polite former law enforcement officer sits down and explains how he came to be in possession of these bullets, how they're related to the Rust case overall, and that he has to take these bullets somewhere, and that he's not sure if he's supposed to give them to the defense attorneys or the prosecutor's attorneys. This is happening during the Hannah Gutierrez Reed trial. So he has attempted to reach the defense attorneys related to this, and they're not sure what to do with it or if they can use it. He thinks they don't want them. So he wants to deliver these bullets into evidence for the sheriff. And this, keep in mind, this guy is a former law enforcement officer who has collected these bullets in order to make sure all the evidence in this case is available. The bullets have actually come from Arizona.
And he is 1,000,000% credible.
He's not only credible, he's also a judge.
Right. And I actually had to listen again because I thought that's what he said.
I hit rewind as well. I was like, wait, this is during the lapel video, the body cam. I was like, did he just say he's a judge?
Right. And the crime scene tech that's taking the evidence is the one that testifies in this trial. She's very familiar with the case. I didn't watch the Hannah Gutierrez Reed trial, so I don't know if she was involved in that as well. But I'm going to go with probably. But it's and at that point, like, what kind of got my attention, because this trial is very dry up until this motion to dismiss hearing, right? And I'm, watching it, kind of plugging along. But the tone of the judge's voice changes.
Yeah, as soon as this lapel camera video happens.
She says it sort of changed during the corporal's testimony, right? Because she got firm about it. She wasn't mean, but the judge, when you hear a judge start asking questions, right?
Yeah.
And it was the nature of the motion to dismiss, because clearly you've got Alec Baldwin's defense attorney asking questions. The prosecution is involved in the circumstances leading up to this motion to dismiss. And so really the only thing to happen would be for the judge to question it, right?
Correct.
Because the prosecutor is involved. And so my ears perk up when the corporal's on the stand. She's an inadequate witness to dispel the motion to dismiss, right?
Yeah.
She's not giving any sort of indication that this motion is frivolous or should be ignored or should not be granted even. And so they move on, because in order to introduce the lapel cam, they've got to call the person who authenticates it and says, yes, this is me, this is it. And she says to the officer with the lapel cam, why do you walk out of the room at that point? And that's when I was really like, oh my goodness, what is about to happen? Because the lapel cam ends abruptly.
Yes. And the explanation was that he was calling to find out what to do here.
Right, exactly. But that's where I sort of perked up and stopped just sort of mundanely absorbing the trial, right?
Yeah. And to preface all of this, the prosecutor has basically promised the judge that between these two witnesses, she's going to find everything, that the judge is going to find everything she needs to just dismiss this and move on with the trial. And this is all about judicial efficiency, that she's only using these two people. So you're right. The judge, during the first testimony here, she's starting to question, why are we going to drag this out? But by the time the second witness is involved, the lieutenant, the judge is incredulous, not at the witness, at the prosecutor. And they're being short and sharp, as you described, with the witness on the stand because it's not making sense anymore. So the prosecutor the defense comes and they cross, and then the judge says, what else do we have here? The prosecutor is trying to tell a story about how these bullets weren't the same bullets and they didn't look similar to any of this. And the judge wants to know, where is this information going to come from in terms of witnesses? They take a recess here, a bathroom break. It's a quick recess. And when they come back, the prosecutor decides that the only remedy here is she's going to put herself under oath, and she's going to be the one to tell all of this.
Now, I'm not sure about you, but there was a bright red neon flashing sign over this situation for me.
Judge Mary Marlowe Summer is so polite about it. She asked, did you guys decide that's how you want to get this in? To the defense attorney and the prosecution. And Alec Baldwin's attorney look at the judge like, we have no idea what's happening right now, but we're going to roll with this. And he says, no, we don't think it's necessary. And the judge says, yeah, I don't think it's necessary. And the prosecutor insists that it is necessary that she swear herself in and that she tell this side of the story so that the judge will understand that this is just an innocent mistake. She then clarifies that these bullets did arrive in the lapel camera that is cut short and that they were classified under a different case number. She doesn't know why because she's not at the sheriff's office, and proceeds to swear herself in, ask herself questions, and narrate everything she thinks the judge needs to hear to excuse what has now, in that neon red flashing sign that Meg saw, it changed from, you've never seen a prosecutor do this before, to the words Brady violation.
And she literally explains her Brady violation on the stand under oath.
That it's just a little Brady violation on the stand under oath in front of this judge.
I don't know. So, okay, I have to believe, as a logical thinking person, that she had somehow justified her actions in her head and that she was going to fix this. I do not believe that she could have thought anything except that and got on the stand.
Well, okay, so here's my thinking on the prosecutor side of things. By the way, while this is happening, the co-counsel for the prosecutor, the first chair or second chair, she resigns while this is going on. She literally quits the prosecutor's office as this hearing takes place.
I don't blame her.
So here's what I think this is what the prosecutor's trying to say. And you should watch this for yourself because you will not see many incidents like this in criminal trials in America ever. Most prosecutors are smart enough to avoid this.
It is a bad idea.
It is the worst idea. You do not do this, period, ever.
And when you've put yourself in this position, you just defer to the judge's discretion on the ruling and you just be quiet.
Yeah, so this is a situation where personally, if I were this prosecutor, this was happening all around me, my reaction is not going to be to swear myself in and talk in front of the judge who's trying this case. I would join the defense's motion and dismiss with the hopes of getting a third bite at the apple, meaning re-indicting Alec Baldwin if I really thought that was a thing. You and I have gone back and forth on that. Like, I felt like as a producer, he had some responsibility. You sort of felt like this was a non-case. I agreed with it not being a case in terms of manslaughter or murder, because that was bandied about early.
I feel like if this had been a no-name actor, he would never have been charged.
I kind of think that's what would happen too. And this prosecutor's testimony sort of takes us down that path. So here's what I think her thinking is. Her thinking is an innocent mistake has occurred. And this is on paper what I think happened. They were too dumb to realize in the sheriff's office that this all needs the same case number and it needs a continuing number, and this evidence needs to be linked to Mr. Baldwin's prosecution. So they put a supplemental report number on it, and they tell no one. I think it made a multi-part error. I think they know that they have it. They discover it at the last minute. The problem is Hannah Gutierrez Reed's trial has already happened, and the big trial is coming. It's Alec Baldwin's trial. So someone, probably the prosecutor that's sitting on the stand under oath, given that all tracks for me, has made the decision that they are not going to tell the defense this has happened. It's an innocent mistake, and we're just going to let it slide. And if they find out, I'll have a story to tell them. Well, in the moment where she had her story to tell, she certainly tells a story on the stand.
But nothing about that is like innocent mistake, right?
Well, up until that moment, no. It was kind of an innocent mistake to not give it to Hannah Gutierrez's attorneys. It was out and out corruption to not give it to Alec Baldwin's attorneys, because the consequences of that would have been Hannah Gutierrez gets a new trial.
And she's actually filed for one, by the way.
Well, she should get one. Not only she shouldn't get a new trial. She should be released. The charges should be
dismissed.
Dismissed, and the charges should be dismissed and with prejudice, and the case should be expunged because of what happened when this prosecutor's on the stand. The prosecutor decides that rather than saying, hey, we made a mistake and we're going to fix that, she goes through this 30-minute long complicated narrative of how they compared those bullets to the bullets from Rust, and they didn't match and it didn't matter. Which makes it worse. Yeah, she essentially tells her whole story, and she, quote, rests her own testimony that she's been narrating, and then the defense attorneys and the judge get a hold of her. The defense attorneys simply say, who did the comparison, how, and they go through the motions of what you would do with any witness that you're cross-examining. And the prosecutor thinks that, she's going to get away with it being the prosecutor. She doesn't. In fact, the defense attorney's questions are so simple. He ends up asking, don't you think those bullets and those bullets look just alike? And she has to acknowledge on the stand under oath that the evidence she said was irrelevant is strikingly similar to the evidence she was using. You would think she would stop, but instead she doubles down. And the defense attorney, because he is not local public defender, which I know people jump on them, but I'm saying this is a guy who is incredibly sharp and at the top of his game. He gets her to admit not only to having an issue with Alec Baldwin's case, but to having an issue with the evidence in Hannah Gutierrez Reed's case. And the judge hears her out, lets the story continue, and the defense attorney lets her talk. They try to help her out of the situation at first, but by the time she has admitted that she hid something, which we're moving beyond Brady violation at that point, okay? You're under oath. You cannot lie about these things in front of this judge because you're going to have to see them next week on a different thing. And it's perjury. But we'll throw that out there. So she just keeps on telling the truth. And she works herself to the point that I think she shocks the judge. Because the judge, it doesn't take her very long to put things together. She has a few questions that she asked, but she comes back, very short order. She comes back and she says that the authorities had unilaterally withheld the supplemental information related to these bullets, that the Santa Fe County Sheriff's officer had made this decision and apparently was working in cahoots with the prosecutor, that the evidence was of no value. They disconnected the evidence from the case, and they made it impossible to determine if the evidence had any evidentiary value to the defense. She further opined that the authorities' willful withholding of this information was intentional, and it was collaborative and deliberate. And that, she said, if this conduct does not rise to the level of bad faith, it comes so near to bad faith as to show signs of scorching prejudice. You have to watch this. If this is the only thing you do this year, guys, I'm telling you, this is one of the wildest, and I'll put it in the show notes so people can see it. This is one of the wildest. It's like 8 hours long. That's the other thing. This whole thing takes 8 hours on this one day.
Really, but I feel like just even if you don't want to spend that long watching it, just watch the prosecutor's testimony.
Yeah, you can. So if you get the Law and Crime link that I'm going to put in here, and that's the one you want to go with, it's like 8 hours and 49 minutes long. If you just go to the marker, it's 6 minutes, 6 hours and 58 minutes. The next thing that'll happen will be the prosecutor talking as she wraps up that witness, and the judge. Like there's a little break's going to come along. You fast forward with the I don't know it off the top of my head, the time code part. But once they come back, the judge is going to try and talk the prosecutor out of testifying, and she's going to be very polite about it. But from that point, watch the rest of it. It's fascinating,
and it's very telling to me that because if you think about the broader implications of like not just this case but any circumstance where you have sort of this civilian, well, he is ex law enforcement and I don't know if he was an ex judge or a current judge or what, but you've got a person bringing evidence in that he says very specifically it has to do with the Rust case, right?
Yeah.
You hear it on the lapel camera. So he has taken time to drive from Arizona to New Mexico to come to the sheriff's office to turn it in. He's talking to these people. There's no notes on the interview, I don't think. The only thing they have really is the lapel camera, which somebody decided to turn on, right? Which gives you the first hint that they were realizing that it could be of value, right?
Yeah.
They don't just walk around with those things on all the time.
Correct.
Okay.
And they have a problem with the audio versus the video, and like there's some implication that like they should have been a little bit more lapel camera footage than there was on the front and the back end.
Oh, right. And so, that just makes it even sketchier, really. But the fact that it existed, it kind of goes against what they're saying in court later. But if you think about it in like a broader scheme, you can't have law enforcement taking perfectly relevant information, evidence, whatever it is coming in, and unilaterally deciding that it doesn't pertain to the case at hand, right?
Correct.
When you have that happen, think about all the exculpating evidence that would just disappear, right? Which is the whole point of why Brady violations are a thing and why there's a very specific path to be taken that ends in charges being dismissed with prejudice, which means they can never be filed again, right?
Yeah.
And it's because it's so bad. And sometimes when you look at situations, and like this was a very clear Brady violation situation, there was no question. I was surprised that, like you said, the prosecution didn't immediately recognize it, having not recognized it when they were doing it. Once it's presented sort of in court in a different light to a judge, why wasn't it clicking then, right?
Yeah. And
because to me, there's absolutely no justification actually given. This is somebody that has tunnel vision.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about the prosecutor. The prosecutor has tunnel vision because the very last thing she should have ever done was got up there and explained it. Because she literally gave them the narrative of the Brady violation, right? This is how we hid the evidence, right?
Yep.
Essentially, that's what happened. And I really feel like in this type of situation, just like when we were talking earlier about the judge and when I said, like, it would be great if the judge had recognized the conflict and said, yeah, I should probably recuse myself, right? Because that's a clear conflict of interest. And here, it would have been nice to have the prosecutor say, you know what, even as I'm talking right now, I realize how wrong I am, right?
Yeah.
And that's just not what happens in these types of situations. Now, she didn't have to put herself on the stand. I feel like that's an extra little something that I feel like it would be a really great idea for that prosecutor, who I think is a special prosecutor, right? Because they went through several prosecutors for various reasons. And they demonstrate in her, because they have her on the stand, because she put herself on the stand, they demonstrate that this was a targeted prosecution, sort of, right?
Yeah.
And Alec Baldwin was targeted, and that has been alleged in some of the other prosecutors that had were initially on the case, but not in trial with the case. But, there's no question, like, there are certain things that could be extrajudicial in prosecuting a movie star, a TV star, whatever you would call him, an actor, right? A famous actor. And they kind of hone in on that just kind of momentarily. And so there can be some motives here that aren't necessarily genuine. And all the time, I think to myself, you get these prosecutors that have tunnel vision one way or the other, and they end up on these cases that make absolutely no sense. And this is one of those I never thought it made sense to charge Alec Baldwin. I felt like it didn't pertain to the particular statute that they were following. Whenever it happened, it was a very sad, news break or whatever. And I read sort of the follow-up on it. And I didn't feel like what had happened warranted criminal charges in any way. And it just kept being reinforced that they weren't looking at it in an unbiased way. Because remember when they tried to do the firearms enhancement, but that didn't apply to this case? Remember?
Yep.
And so there was a lot of stuff happening, right? And it would have been very, I don't know. There's been a lot of crazy stuff happening in court cases here recently. And sometimes I wonder, like, well, what am I doing? Because honestly, I didn't expect this to come out of the Baldwin trial at all. It was very boring, but I wanted to see what happened, right? And I wanted to see it from I don't want to read a paragraph about it. I wanted to know what was actually going on. And it ended up being I think that prosecutor probably made history by putting herself on the stand and testifying a detailed account of her Brady violation in defense of it, which there was no defense to be had. If I were her, I would seriously reconsider my perspective on things before I prosecuted another case, because I don't see how, while she's sitting on the stand, she feels like she's helping herself.
Yeah.
Literally everything she's saying is just saying, yes, I did this. And everybody else in the room realized that, right?
It did.
And at that point, I don't really know what to do, but it was one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen happen, because she just kept talking. And I'm like, she must believe this. And knowing that there's a prosecutor that believes things like this, it's horrifying.
I get they have to be zealous for the victims in these cases. I totally do believe that. I believe they have to be zealous in prosecuting people. But sometimes you just miss the boat. And in this instance, they missed the boat so hard. I didn't even understand. I don't think she and I would be in the same ocean.
Well, and that was part of it, because you kind of expect to hear something that especially under these particular circumstances, right? There's a break. She gets on the stand anyway after everybody's told her not. Even the defense attorney was like, I'm not
I don't
asking
need her.
her.
Yeah.
And it's, they both waived their closing argument, right? Because the defense attorney says, like, yeah, I don't really think that I need to close. I think this is pretty obvious. And then the prosecutor is like, yeah, I don't need a closing argument. And at that point, she starts to seem like maybe it's registering that she's a little defeated. I don't know for certain, but I know that it was very alarming to me, expecting some sum and substance indicating, Judge, this is not a Brady violation, and here's why, right? Expecting that to come out of her mouth when she literally was just saying, I absolutely committed a Brady violation. I was in on it with the law enforcement that were involved. We have all this evidence that we did it. I mean, she wasn't saying those words, but the words she was saying that, right? And I'm going, yeah, that just tanked really fast. And so hopefully she gets her head on straight. And I guess there was something that they thought was worthwhile in pursuing charges against Alec Baldwin. It is now completely over.
Yeah, there's nothing they can do. This was dismissed with prejudice. They made a mess out of this. The idea that like anything good could come from this was, I don't know what they were thinking. But I can tell you that they did put out a statement afterwards that they were not going to be talking about this in the news.
Well, they really shouldn't. They should never talk about this again. This is a very, very bad prosecution. I mean, it was really terrible. Every single defendant and defense team should have the opportunity to examine all the evidence available for the case and do whatever they feel is relevant to the defense of the case, right? It flies in the face of our justice system and our criminal trial process to have any law enforcement unilaterally segmenting off evidence and saying, this doesn't pertain to the case when very clearly it does, right?
Yeah.
It's a really bad example that's just sort of marched right out there for everyone to see.
Yeah, it is. And unfortunately, while it is a highly entertaining piece of, this is honestly judicial history and people won't realize that for a while. It does come on the heels of a major tragedy here because we lost Elena Hutchins in this horrible incident on a movie set, far too young. I think she was 41 or 42 years old when she passed away. And this is a woman who grew up on a Soviet military base, whose father had served in the Soviet Navy. She was a Ukrainian cinematographer because that's where she landed and was educated. And, that's a different time when you go back and look at the 70s and early 80s for someone from the Ukraine. It's a huge tragedy that she has passed away. And she left behind, a husband and a child. And, she's gone. It's one of those things where, yes, you're seeing some amazing piece of judicial history, but we've also had this terrible, terrible tragedy that didn't have to take place either.
Right. And to some extent, I don't know exactly how the family feels about it. I know Gloria Allred is representing them in some capacity. I don't think that her parents speak English. And she talked some outside of the courtroom and where the court TV and everybody congregates before the
press pool
session. Yeah. Before the session starts, she made some comments, and I think that it can be construed to, because Alec Baldwin was charged, in like taking all of the like innocent until proven guilty and all of the rights that we have as U.S. citizens under the Constitution, think that there's some implied culpability, right? When charges are made in cases like this, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like it can skew the narrative because it is entirely possible that somebody said, oh, well, they wouldn't have charged him if he hadn't have done something wrong, right?
Yeah.
And that's just not the case. He really didn't do anything wrong. He shouldn't have been charged. Usually, these garbage type situations, they take care of themselves because they end up with these ridiculous things happening, right?
Yeah.
Which is this case all around. I hated that Alec Baldwin went through it, but I do agree with Hannah Gutierrez Reed being held accountable for her role in this situation. I also believe that if it's found that a Brady violation was committed in her case, which obviously it was, right, that she should also have her charges dismissed without prejudice. I don't know that the family, like Helena Hutchins' parents, I don't know that they're going to appreciate that because of it being sort of a technicality, right?
Yeah.
But, if we were to know that the ammunition that fired had all the markings of ammunition that wouldn't fire, then whose fault is it, right?
Yeah, that's an impossible situation to like go through and figure that all out because everything was handled so much in the days right afterwards by an agency that you ultimately can't trust in this matter.
Right, exactly. And so I feel like the attempt to obtain justice for the victim in the case where it is just an accident or at the worst negligence, because I don't think there's an argument that there was no intent behind any of this. I feel like that's pretty obvious, right?
Yeah.
But in the event that you start charging people and you have somebody plea and then like you have this dismissal and there is no recourse because it was such a bad mess up that they can't bring the charges again. I feel like that can be just as bad as not getting justice at all.
100% agree. I 100% agree with that idea. Well, I don't have much more on this one, do you?
No, I feel like it's actually really done. I did look to see if Carrie Morthy was still employed, and I didn't see any change in that. She did say that she respected the court's decision after, I think again in the press poll, it was her statement, but it probably won't come back up again. Hopefully, Alec Baldwin will get to not be stressed out about criminal charges for a while.
Yeah, I hope that I hope somehow the Hutchins family is made whole from all this. I don't think that you really can be, but I hope that consideration is given to them and the rest of their life they're able to remember her and to move on in their own way. Thank you so much for listening today. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
All right, so I'm going to tell you guys a few things about some of the folks who are helping sponsor our show. Now, Labrati Creations sponsors our show, and you can always use the Crime XS code there. You can also just message them at Labrati Creations, and they will generally do something for the people who come from True Crime XS. They were our very first sponsor. They've done a lot for the show, and that code is CrimeXS at LabratiCreations.com. The first new advertisers that we have, and I've selected all of these guys. I've selected all of these advertisers So the very first one is Cure. Now, I'm going to tell you guys about this, about Cure as being one of our sponsors. If you're an athlete, you know that proper hydration is key to peak performance, but plain water can be boring and sports drinks can be filled with artificial ingredients and added sugars. That's why we love Cure. It's a clean and effective way to stay hydrated and perform at your best. I use it late in the day when I switch out of caffeine mode. Specifically, when I hit the pool or I go play tennis with my wife, I use Cure to help me stay hydrated. It helps me recover after a long day. Now, you guys may not know this, but I build things. Right now, I've been building several structures on our property out here. Among those is a new podcast studio space for myself. I do a lot of that work at night and into the wee hours, and I always have some Cure with me to go into my aluminum water bottle. Hydration is not just about filling up my aluminum bottle with water. Cure Hydration is an oral rehydration solution that contains the perfect balance of electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb water and rehydrate quickly. Whether I'm building things or putting the podcast together or chasing these dogs that you sometimes hear in my studio up and down the trails to get them worn out, Cure Hydration is the way that I choose to go. Cure Hydration is an oral rehydration solution, or an ORS, that contains the perfect balance of electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb water and to rehydrate quickly. The formula is made with all natural ingredients like coconut water powder and pink Himalayan salt. It's free from artificial flavors, from sweeteners, and preservatives. Cure Hydration is vegan, gluten-free, and non-GMO, making it a great option for anyone with dietary restrictions or preferences. The packets are convenient and easy to use. You just mix them with your water and you drink. They're perfect for on the go. They're perfect for travel. And anytime you need a quick and effective hydration boost, ready to combat dehydration, then you try Cure today and feel the difference for yourself. You can use code TrueCrimeXS for 20% off your order. That's TrueCrimeXS. I have a link that I'm putting in the most recent episode show notes, and True Crime Access will get you 20% off. Our second sponsor for the show today is Laird. Now, Laird has a list of things that they want me to tell you about. They have better ingredients with amazing taste and functional benefits. They have a superfood creamer crafted from the highest quality, all-natural, real food ingredients. All Laird products are sustainably sourced and thoroughly tested to ensure that you're incorporating the cleanest, finest fuel into your routine. They have all natural whole food ingredients, and they contain naturally occurring MCTs made from coconut oil. There's no artificial flavors, there's no colors or additives, and there's no sugar from highly refined corn syrup. They want me to talk about my love of coffee, but the truth is, I don't do much with coffee. But let me tell you someone who does. My wife has to have a cup of coffee every day. Now, I've fallen off recently, but one of the big things that I've done since the beginning of our relationship is she used to go and get a Starbucks every morning. I have substituted that out by always trying to make her coffee. It's not going to be every single day of time from when I met her, but for the most part, almost every day, I make her coffee. I put her creamers together, and I make sure that she has a good way to start her day. So with Laird, he started experimenting with his morning ritual almost 2 decades ago. He found that when he started adding fats to his morning cup, like coconut oil, he had amazing energy throughout the rest of his day. He gradually perfected this recipe for an epic cup of fuel, and he began sharing it with his friends in the surf community. I'm an ocean guy, so I saw this item and I was like, okay, we're going to try this one out. Are you ready to feel more energized, more focused, and supported? Go to lairdsuperfood.com and add nourishing plant-based foods to fuel you from sunrise to sunset. And you can use our promo code at checkout to save 15% off your purchase today. Our offer code for this for Laird is going to be True Crime XS. Pretty much everywhere except for Labarde Creations. If you use True Crime XS, that will get you, at Laird, it'll get you 15% off. At some of the other places, they'll get you 20%. And the last sponsor I want to tell you about is Zencastr. We're part of Zencastr's creative network. We've been using Zencastr since about midway into our first season. Meg and I experimented with a lot of different ways to put the podcast together. And the truth is, Zencastr, an integral ingredient to us being able to bring you this show. It's so easy. It's now super easy. You can record a podcast with Zencastr. You can log in using your browser and you start recording a high quality podcast right away. You can record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guest. You get to feel a sense of zen, knowing that Zencastr's multi-layered backups ensure you will always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable. You sound your best. I mean, if you've ever worried about what you sound like, Zencastr's post-production process makes you sound buttery smooth. It automatically removes those ums and ahs in your recordings. It removes those awkward pauses in conversation too. You can set the right podcast loudness and levels while reducing background noise with a click of a button. That's how you don't hear my dogs every second of every episode. Zencastr is all in one. If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are now over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast all in one place, and you can distribute to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. Just go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code TrueCrimeXS, and you're going to get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. You can also check out the other plans they have available. I want you to have the same easy experiences that I do for all my podcasting and content needs. So zencastr.com/pricing. The offer code is TrueCrimeXS, and it's time for you to share your story today. We are also adding New Era as a sponsor for the show. New Era Cap is a headwear and apparel brand founded in 1920 in Buffalo, New York. Now, I actually have some experience with New Era caps. My dad and I have been through multiple iterations of baseball caps through the years. We collect different styles, different eras, and now my teenager has started his own cap collection and has several New Eras as the centerpieces. Our favorite teams may not be the same, but our outfits are all topped with the same New Era ball caps. We love the quality and the ability to wear what the players are wearing. Not to mention, New Era is the leading headwear manufacturer with quality licensed products. You can support your favorite college or pro team in style from the official headwear provider for the MLB, NFL, and NBA. You can get a stylish accessory for your everyday ensemble and support True Crime XS. Just shop the official headwear and get 15% off when you go to neweracap.com. That's neweracap.com/TrueCrimeXS. You can also use the code TrueCrimeXS at checkout. That's it. That's all you have to do. And that's 15% off your order using the promo code TrueCrimeXS.